Is everybody there?
We're live streaming right now to YouTube. So I'm going to mute for a moment and then we'll start the webinar in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Jonathan, can you bring me down my charging cable and plug from the top bedroom? This is eating my iPad's electricity.
And is that still COVID?
Me coughing? Yeah. No, no, I'm clear of COVID, but I'm definitely getting some after effects of exhaustion. I've really lost some stamina as a result of it. So if I do anything the slightest bit tiring, then I have to sort of have a lie down. I went to take the spray hood and the cockpit tent down off the boat this morning, and when I got back, I fell asleep.
Now you're knackered.
That's it. That's the word. That's the technical Irish expression.
How protected is your boat there with, you've got 100-mile-an-hour winds? Is it coming, what direction is it going to hit the boat at?
Well, unfortunately, I'm out of the water on a cradle at the moment.
Oh, that's not good.
So I'm right up in the air, but anyway, I've taken all the canvas down and all the sails are already off. So that's a rule here. You cannot lift a boat out in my boat, the boatyard I use, with any kind of sail left on the boat, which is good.
And are you under a doctor's care for COVID?
No. No, I mean, I haven't still got COVID. I'm clear I'm testing negative. I'm just a little bit wiped out by it. I think it's a little more to it than people think. Even though I'm double jabbed and boosted, so three vaccinations. It wasn't too bad when I had it. It was like a flu, you know, with the temperature and a cold with the temperature. But the tiredness afterwards is a bit of a surprise.
Lack of stamina, as you said, right?
Yeah. Although, you know, I have played 3 or 4 rounds of golf since, so it's not that bad.
Yes.
But I vacuumed 2 flights of stairs and definitely had to lie down on my bed afterwards.
Wow.
So I'm better at golf than vacuuming is the conclusion you can draw from that.
Well, we're going to start the webinar. We're going to start the webinar. So why don't you guys both mute?
Okay. Muting now.
Now I have to go back one. Ready? This is SSCA. We're starting the webinar. We're opening up the webinar to let participants to come in. I can see them building. They're coming in every second. Our speakers, Anne and Lloyd in England and Duncan Sweet in Porta, are online and ready to present. You will have question and answer after the the slides are presented, there'll be a question and answer session. So if you have questions for Anne, who is going to be through a significant windstorm shortly, or Duncan, who's probably already been through the storm, but I think you're below that right now in the Azores. Those storms are going pretty much to the north. But we'll wait just a few minutes, let some more people come in, and then we will start the webinar. This is Joan Conover, Seven Seas Cruising Association. I'm located in Virginia. This is Preparing for Your Offshore Passage with Duncan Sweet, who's located in the Azores, Mid-Atlantic Yacht Services, and Anne Lloyd, who's located in England. And she's a circumnavigator with her husband, Jonathan. Their boat is Sailing Yacht Sofia. This SSCA webinar is a discussion with experts. They completed major passages, or in the case of Mid-Atlantic Yacht Services, have assisted in many offshore emergencies, and both have experienced passage issues and equipment issues. Anne Lloyd, along with Jonathan, has completed a 5-year circumnavigation, which means Atlantic and Pacific experience, now resides in England. Both speakers are Seven Seas Cruising hosts. For this webinar, each person, crew, or captain must know they must make their own decisions in each situation. No situation is the same. We're providing this webinar as a guide for information, entertainment, but on a serious topic. Questions can be asked at the end of the presentation, or you can ask or chat at either the chat or Q&A below. Our sponsors, Nautic Ed is providing the interface to allow us to have this webinar. SSCA members get 2 free classes with Nautic Ed, but some of these sponsors also offer significant discounts to SSCA members, and there are many of them have products that we have used, Duncan knows of, and Anne has probably utilized in her passaging. Speaker Duncan Sweet. Duncan is in Hort of the Azores. He's an experienced sailor. He founded MAYS, Mid-Atlantic Yacht Services. And I will be very frank, Duncan has been like the catcher's mitt in the middle of the Atlantic for boats leaving either Europe or going from USA or from points south from the Caribbean to the Azores. He's probably experienced anything and everything someone can come up with in the many years that he has operated MAYS. Anne Lloyd, she's a circumnavigator. My hat's off to her and to Jonathan. She and her husband have many years sailing and spent 5 years passaging around the world. You can see from the images below, a very well-founded boat. I can look through it and kind of check off my checklist. looking at what equipment they have and the fact that they're clipped on, that they have good equipment. Now, this slide is a preparation review. Most of these things should already have been considered if you're going to be passaging soon. If you're passaging in the fall, these are things you probably should have already done if you haven't already. I'm going to ask Anne to talk on items 1 and 5, and ask Duncan to speak on items 2, 3, and 4. Anne, can you discuss something on man overboard concerns, lifeline tethers, life vests?
Sure. So the main thing to say about man overboard is the primary duty of everybody on a sailing yacht is not to fall overboard in the first place. There are various things you can do to assist with that. Perhaps the most important is to have jack lines fitted to the boat. They might be made of webbing or metal, rigging wire, that kind of thing. The run of the jack lines needs to be well thought out so that people aren't tempted to avoid clipping on when moving about in stronger conditions. And the wearing of a well-fitting life jacket with crutch straps is an important consideration. Now, I'll admit that when we sailed around the world, we did not wear our life jackets every hour of every day, but we should have. But we certainly wore them every night we were ever at sea and in bad conditions. Sometimes there's a discussion on board whether the conditions are bad, but a well-fitting life jacket for every crew member is a really important thing. And it should be either professionally serviced every year or taken apart every year, and the bottles checked and everything checked about it. That it should have a light, it should have a whistle. And ideally, I think in the modern world, it's sensible to have an AIS transponder built into the life jacket so that if you fall overboard, you immediately are sending out a signal to the boat showing where you are. These are not expensive now, and I regard it as completely essential item because, especially if you're sailing shorthanded like my husband and I, the chances are actually that one of you will go overboard when the other one's asleep. The other thing you can consider putting on board your boat is an alarm system, which again will make a major sound if someone goes overboard, so that the other person left on the boat knows that you're in the water. So those items are a personal AIS built into your life jacket, and perhaps a man overboard alarm are really significant things you can add to increase your safety. And the other thing we have on our life jackets is a personal EPIRB, which in the event that the person on the boat doesn't know where you are, at least the rescue services can find you for a while. It's important that you've practiced man overboard drills. And in the case of shorthanded couples sailing, that's going to mean one of you is going to have to manage to maneuver the boat, get the sails under control, keep an eye on the person who's gone overboard, or use an AIS-based system to find them, and do it all by yourself. And of course, it might be at night or in bad conditions, which is everybody's nightmare. Which is why you come back to the opening point, which is don't fall overboard in the first place. Wear your life jacket, clip on in any kind of significant conditions, crawl around the deck if necessary, and be very mindful of staying on the boat. That's the single best thing you can do to save your life. Because once you've gone overboard in a shorthanded crew situation, you are really in trouble.
And thank you for that. And Duncan, can you discuss the next topics, and then we'll go to number 5 with Anne again.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks also for inviting me to participate in this. I'm honored to be here. And my hat's off to not only Anne and Jonathan for their circumnavigation, but to Joan and her husband, Greg, and their many, many miles at sea, and Joan's incredible contribution to the SSCA and to cruising offshore in general. She really is an amazing resource. So my hat's off to both of these women. Thank you both. The engine room, yes, it's probably for some people it's a familiar area, and for others not so familiar. If you're not familiar with the engine room and not familiar with everything that's in there, or most things that are in there, I urge you before you take any long trips to really take time, read books, watch videos, and stick your head in your own engine room and say, well, what does this do? Do I need a spare for that? Do I know how to change this or change that? And yes, you need to know how to change the oil and change fuel filters and oil filters, but it's much deeper than that. What's this drip? Is that drip in the engine room? Is it antifreeze? Is it engine oil? Is it fuel? Is it salt water? These are things that are important when you're offshore and you're going to cross 1,000 miles or even only 100 miles of water. It's really important that you become familiar with the things that are in the engine room. And one of the things that scares me, maybe not as important as man overboard, but having a breach in the hull, having water in the hull that's unexpected is pretty scary. In other words, you're sinking to one degree or another. It's really important you understand where your sea cocks are. Where's the water coming from? Is it from a broken hose? Is it something you hit at sea? Is there leaks through the deck? Did a hatch break? Is that letting a lot of water in? The deck scuppers in the cockpit. If one of those hoses come off and you're taking water over the deck at night, you're going to have an enormous amount of water below decks through the deck scuppers in the cockpit. And rigging and the mast. I hope everybody that's listening here is familiar with the bosun's chair and has been aloft on their boat to look at the rig, the rigging, the wiring, the lights. It's really important. And I know a lot of people have never been in a bosun's chair. They've never been up their mast. I urge you to, again, read books, watch videos about what is up there. It's important that it stays up there. Every summer we see a few boats in Horta without a mast. And most of the dismastings that I'm aware of, it was not a really complex set of circumstances to come together. It was normally one primary failure that led to another one and brought down the mast. So the primary failures are usually visually available for you to see and go, oh my God, that needs to be changed. And I would turn this back over to Anne and the abandoned ship drills and life raft procedures. Anne?
Yeah, before I go to the abandoned ship drills, I'd just like to come in on the rigging because we bought a second-hand used boat, which was 13 years old, and we replaced all the wire rigging before we went on our circumnavigation. However, we thought we'd done our bit to keep ourselves safe, and we regularly had rigging inspections, both ourselves and professional, before we cross oceans. But halfway across the Pacific Ocean, we lost, we have a 3-spreader mast, and we lost one diagonal wire. It broke, it sheared at the fitting where it attaches to the mast. We saw it pretty quickly, and I went up the mast at sea and did a jury rig to try and stabilize the mast, which started wobbling in all directions. But as a result of the pressures put on the other wires because of the movement, we lost in the end 3 diagonals. And even with our jury rig, which we improved, the mast was waving around, as I famously called it, like wet spaghetti. And we had 1,000 miles to go. So we started with new rigging, and that still happened to us. So you really have to be familiar with what your rigging should look like and get up that mast and check it on a regular basis. And even if it's brand new, you can't trust it. And you have to have a plan about what you're going to do if something breaks. You have to have stuff with you to replace broken wires. Possibly you would have a stay lock system of wire and stuff if you're competent, or even just good Dyneema. But you need to think about what you would do when a wire breaks if you're in the middle of the ocean, because the movement in the ocean is considerable, and nothing ever moves so much as the boat in the water once you've got a broken wires and the mast is waving around. It's pretty terrifying. And we had it like that for 7 days and 1,000 miles. And so that's something to think about. I don't want to scare you, but you're not safe at any point just because you bought new rigging. You really have to keep on top of it.
And
Now,
can you tell us what time frame between the new wire and when the first diagonal popped?
so the wire was put on in January 2014, and the wires broke in March 2015. So we crossed the Atlantic Ocean with very benign conditions, no bad weather of any kind, nothing that would stress you out. We crossed the Caribbean with some quite significant bad weather. And then we were crossing the Pacific with very benign conditions, and it broke. And it broke not on the wire and not on the swage, but it broke, and all three broke in the same way. They broke across the steel fitting of a Selden hook fitting that hooks into the mast, and it sheared across it. And to this day, I don't know why it broke. The first riggers I was speaking to on the phone in the middle of the ocean said, obviously your rigging is too loose. It's got loose. It's loosened up. You should have had it retuned. The rigger, when we got to Tahiti, who looked at it, said, no, it wasn't too loose. It was too tight from the outset. The strains were being taken in the wrong bit. And then when we got to New Zealand, someone looked at the wires and they said, no, I think these were faulty fittings. So pay your money and you take your choice. 3 experts said too loose, too tight, and faulty fittings, which is a bit alarming because we didn't want it to happen again. But there you are. So hopefully you won't be abandoning your ship. But if you have to abandon your ship drills, you need to think about what you would do in advance. And I mentioned to Joan earlier, one of the most useful things you can do before you go on your voyage is take a course. In England, we call it the Sea Survival course. That's a course where they teach you about getting into life rafts. You actually sit in a life raft with a few other people and you realize how unpleasant it would be. That's just in a swimming pool. You learn how to write a life raft, because whenever you launch a life raft, it almost certainly will be upside down in the sea and everything else is going badly wrong already. And you need to consider what you would put in your bag that you're going to take in the life raft. And ideally, the bag is ready to go every time you're on the boat. We on Sofia carry 2 crash bags. One is permanently full of certain things, like GPS, handheld GPS, Garmin 45, food, first aid kit, torches, that kind of thing, batteries. And obviously you have to keep on top of the batteries. And then we have a second grab bag where we add things that we are using on the boat, like satellite phone, binoculars, hand bearing compass, flares, etc. So we have two grab bags, a sort of one that you top up. And I have a list posted above my radio of things I have to add when we're getting off the boat into the life raft. And that actually includes all the jerry jugs of water I can find, some extra food, suntan cream, hats, t-shirts with long sleeves, all the things you'd like if you had to live in a life raft for hopefully only 24 hours. But we've all read the book, 110 Days in the Life Raft. So you need to think about it in advance. Very important to keep on top of it and not end up getting into a life raft with a torch that's had the batteries in for the last 10 years and water that's undrinkable. So you need a little preparation in advance and think about what you'd like to have with you in this life raft, and think about it. And EPIRBs, it's very important, I think, when sailing across oceans now to have an EPIRB with you. And it should be your EPIRB registered to your name and your boat name and with up-to-date contact people, so that when the US Coast Guard come to answer this call, it doesn't say that you're on a French catamaran that's owned by some German, but it actually says it's owned by Anne and Jonathan Lloyd, and they know who to ring. They've had a lot of trouble in the Caribbean, I know, in recent years with Glenn Tuttle and the KPK network, trying to help people who fired off other people's EPIRBs, and it hasn't helped at all. So EPIRBs are great, but they're only as good as the information that's registered with the national authority. Anything there, Duncan, on that?
As a person who's worked with Glenn on some of these issues in the Caribbean or other areas, trying to help somebody 2 weeks after they've called for help because they can't find where the registration is, or the authorities didn't think it was important because it wasn't registered correctly. That's not good for anyone. So the registration, like you said, it's really important to have that registration, have it current, and have the people who you tell, or the contact person for that EPIRB know what to tell the people if someone calls. Very important. Preparation for passaging. Items 1 through 4, very basic. Captains and crew, you have safety guidelines, heavy weather. You need updated documentation, charts, maps, routes, weather, and Anne has used Aqua Maps, which is one of our sponsors, but you can update that the day you leave. You can update it and it's current. So, update your electronics as best you can with maps and data before you leave a port. Provision fuels and water, we'll talk a bit later, but make sure it's suitable for distances. The next 4 slides, or 5 communications we have for several. Keep afloat, stay healthy, resources and energy management and communications. Best practices, keep afloat. Know your boat, and it's a good idea. Duncan mentioned the through hulls and whatnot. In an emergency, you're not going to remember a lot of things. Post a diagram. Maybe you're not available, your captain's not available, your crew's there. Post a diagram so you can tell someone to look at the diagram and go to point A. You might have a couple ingress areas. But I'm going to turn this over to Duncan to talk over this, some of the ideas, the sources, and what can happen, water below decks or leaks. Duncan?
Thanks, Joan. I think it's really critical that everybody has at least know how many seacocks there are, how many through hulls are on their boat, and where they are, and can easily get at them, so that if you need to inspect them, if you've got a lot of water in the hull that you didn't expect to be there, where is it coming from? Is it coming from one of the seacocks up forward, like the toilet, the forward head, or the sink drain in the forward head sometimes is a problem. You need to be able to lift a floorboard and close that seacock without moving a lot of stuff, without struggling to get the floorboard up. So it's a good idea to practice. Okay, I've got a lot of water in the hull. I need to look for all of my seacocks in the next 1.5 minutes. So you start forward and you come working aft to check every single seacock. Is the hose still there? Or is that the source of the water? Sometimes it's easy to figure out if the water is coming from aft or is it coming from forward. That at least eliminates a half of the boat you have to search. But it is critical. A boat will fill up with water with a big hole very quickly. And I'm not trying to scare you, but if you hit something at sea, a log, for example, and you put a hole in the boat, or you knock a through hull through the boat into the interior, and you start to get a lot of water fast. You need to be able to get it out. You need to be able to find the source, which is sometimes very, very difficult. But anyway, you need to know where the seacocks are, because those are for sure one of the options that will fill the boat very quickly. Obviously, the more pumps you have, the better. If you are taking on water at a large rate, one giant hand pump, one giant electric pump, or 2 manual pumps, 2 electric pumps. You can't have enough, and you always need to have a 5-gallon bucket or a 3-gallon bucket, because nothing pumps water like a man scared and a 5-gallon bucket in his hand. It's also possible to rig an engine-driven pump that will also shift a lot of water, but that's dependent on you having an engine that works at the time and being able to get at the clutch that engages the engine-driven pump. Personally, I think one of the greatest pumps, manual pumps, is Henderson and Whale make some very large pumps that will shift a lot of water by hand. And then Edson in the US, they also make a very high capacity manual pump, but you do need to have crew that can run those pumps in an emergency. Anne, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, just before we set off on my circumnavigation, we watched the worst sailing movie ever made, which was Robert Redford, All Alone, where he hits a container and wakes up and the boat is full of water and he wafts around on the boat. He doesn't turn on his engine and get his electric pump working. He waits till the water has gone above his batteries and wiped out all chance of using mechanical pumps and his radio system. So that's the absolute Bible for now, how not to do it. And it was the worst sailing movie ever, I think. But you want several ways of getting the water out. I personally have a very big capacity electric bilge pump with long leads that I can clip straight on the batteries. But obviously then I need to recharge the batteries, and I can move it anywhere in the boat. And I have a 5-meter hose to stick out of a window to pump the water out. I saw it at the boat show, emptying a bathtub of water in seconds. And I thought, I need one of those. But you have to have power to make it work. But you need a plan. And then once you've got the pump working, you need another plan about how to fix the hole if you have a hole. And you need some stuff on your boat with you to think about that. But that's a whole other topic. But terrifying, unexpected water inside a sailing boat, one of the worst things that can happen to you.
I agree. We've had that happen. It was a siphon effect, but whale gusher pump was needed to clear out enough so that we could figure out what was going on. Best practices too, stay healthy. Stay warm and dry. You have seasickness, think ahead. Meals and snacks, essential medicine, first aid knowledge and kits. Think of prescriptions and put them in your crash bag. No individual medical needs. Stay dry and warm. Gear, dry clothes, bunk. If you're in a wet boat, you're not going to sleep well. And you've had some real experiences going around the world in many foreign ports with medical issues and first aid kits. And I think you mentioned a bit on a first aid kit that you put together yourself.
Yes. I mean, a true ocean going first aid kit is an expensive item to buy. In England, it's about £2,000, so about $3,000 US. And it's a very well put together thing. And things like the Clipper Around the World Yacht Race, they have these kits on board and they're all lovely color coded thing in rucksacks of different colors. But I think you don't have to buy it in that way. I put one together pretty reasonably, actually, buying stuff off Amazon, using lists of contents from these expensive kits, getting advice from my doctor, and taking advice from some famous long-term cruisers like the Pardys and Beth Leonard and people like that. You need a first aid kit that's ready for a number of topics. Bleeding, bangs and bruises, sickness of various kinds, upset stomachs, urinary tract infections, that kind of thing. Stuff for people getting stuff in their eyes, their ears. Bangs on the head. The most likely thing that happens to you on a yacht is some kind of banging injury. The boom hits you, you fall overboard, you fall into things, you break things, you bruise things, you break your ribs. Pain, sort of long-term pain because you've broken your ribs. These are all important things to think about. In terms of our own little minor disasters, I fell over in heavy conditions at the end of some bad weather, really. I thought it was over, so I was cooking down below and I didn't have one hand for the boat. I was pouring rice from the packet into a pan and wasn't holding onto the boat, and I took a lurch and I cracked 3 ribs and cracked my pelvis in the Caribbean. So that was fun. And I was completely incapacitated for about 3 days. And that was really a question of needing a serious painkiller. And then I discovered my first aid kit didn't really have a serious painkiller. My husband crushed his fingers with a spinnaker pole when it slipped off the mast, crushed his fingers to the bone and lots of blood. He, on another occasion, put a different set of fingers into the wind generator and sliced his finger to the bone. But luckily at that time we were tied up in a harbour. So all we had to do was get ashore to the hospital where a lovely French woman sewed him up. But it could have happened at sea. We had sutures and stuff in our first aid kit. We had lots of bandages. He's just lucky it wasn't me who had to sew up his fingers. And then finally, he managed to fall over. Our final really good injury was in the United States while stationary at anchor. He fell over in the cockpit and broke his shoulder in 4 places. And that is well beyond the average first aid kit or average other crew member to fix. But so boats are tricky spots, and you are going to hurt yourself at some point, and you just don't want it to be fatal or people to actually lose fingers and hands. But you need to think about it, and you need to know where the stuff is, and you need to be moderately confident in its use, and be very careful of any kind of urine infections, that kind of thing, because they can get badly out of hand.
Duncan, you've had experience with both and with injury, and I hope you get better soon. I worry about you with that cough, but
yes, well, don't catch COVID on your trip either. Yeah.
right. Duncan, you're muted. Do you want to unmute, or do you have any comments? You've had boats come in with health issues, I'm sure. Anything you can add?
Yeah, I think one resource that's important is to have on board books about first aid afloat or medical emergencies at sea. A well-written book by professionals, by medical people, written specifically with the cruising person in mind is a godsend. And then also, especially if you have a single sideband, subscribing to a single sideband medical advice and guidance. That can also be through email as well. But to set that up before you go on a long trip is good, because if you do have an emergency, you can get a one-on-one consultation with medical practitioners that will help you with most of the issues that you can imagine. So those would be my two points.
And
I'd like to add something. If you're taking crew who are strangers to you, or even friends, you have to have a very serious conversation with them about any medical issues they have that they have not revealed to you previously. I know a couple who were taking a man, and they were going to cross the Indian Ocean, and they had left Australia when he announced after 5 days and about 800 miles that he hadn't been able to go to the bathroom for 3 of them. And they took advice over the radio, and they had to get him back or he was going to die. And he already always had a problem, and he knew he had a problem the day he left, but he kept it to himself. So they had to come back against the prevailing conditions. People do lie, you know, when they get on your boat, and they fail to tell you they had an open heart surgery, 6 months ago, or that they've had this, or that they've had that, or they're in recovery from cancer. And you have to know what you've got on your boat with you, because you've got people's life in your hands. And I'm afraid sometimes people are entirely irresponsible. So if you're taking strangers or even friends who haven't shared their whole life history with you, you need to know what's wrong with them before you let them on your boat.
And that's a really good example. One that I think Glenn and Tuttle and I both watched from the sidelines on was a crew on a boat that had had a liver transplant and didn't tell the captain, and then he lost his medication for preventing rejection. And it took the U.S. Coast Guard to fly a C-130 over after someone had gotten him extra medication and do a drop to the boat south of Bermuda. Now that was very expensive. And the only reason he lost his medication is he was sick, and he was, I guess, and maybe it fell out of his pocket. He didn't have any extras because he was hiding it from folks, is all I can think. But anyway, you got it. There can't be any health secrets on a vessel. Best practices for communications. Know and practice your communications before you leave. There's many devices, and I'll ask Anne to talk over some of them, but you have radios, you have VHF with DSC. Most countries, foreign countries and the US, are looking at VHF DSC as a way to communicate. Single sideband, still my preferred method of communications offshore, and written instructions for everybody because you may not be there. Communicate with the crew. And then I will let Anne talk over communications offshore, Atlantic and Pacific. And then I'll ask Duncan to talk about what he's seen communication-wise, but know how, where, and who to communicate with or without the captain. But Anne, I know you have a lot on this.
Yeah, so happy to go to this, but you might want to come back to, you just went through slide number 3. But anyway, if we do the communications now, we can go back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Most people who are going offshore do have a number of systems to communicate these days. Traditionally, it was high frequency radios or ham radios. particularly in the United States. A lot of people have a ham license to use radios offshore. Almost every boat has a shorter range VHF radio, ideally with DSC built in. And then many people now have an additional satellite-based system like an Iridium Go, an InReach, or this new Zolea, which I haven't come across myself. I think the best advice would be to have several systems on board. I am a huge fan of high-frequency radio, both for the social life of crossing oceans, when you can be in contact with other boats as you're going along. That has a safety element too. I think Iridium Go and InReach are a terrific resource for weather forecasting and receiving information and staying in touch with family and friends. And in particular, the smaller things can be taken in a life raft in the eventuality you have to abandon ship. So I think you want multiple systems, particularly in the light of various disasters that could come your way. So if you only rely on high frequency radio, you could lose your mast and you lose your aerial. If you lose your mast, you lose your VHF aerial, and a handheld VHF, though it's a very useful thing, doesn't go very far. Something like an Iridium Go or an InReach, while it's charged, will serve you very well. We carried also a satellite phone, which we didn't use for weather and things. It was purely for emergencies, and it came into its own on a couple of occasions. So you want multiple systems. You want to know how to use them. Ideally, if you're using a satellite phone or things like that, you want to pre-program in numbers of things like the US Coast Guard or your family or emergency contacts, so that when you're in a little panic, you can press number 1 and get through. And you need your crew to also know how to use them. I was the licensed operator of the high frequency radio, but my husband, who's ex-military, does know how to use a radio. But it's no good only one person knowing how to use these things, and they're the one who's fallen overboard or banged their head or having the emergency. So everybody in the crew needs to know how to use those things and not be frightened of using them, and know what to do. There was a horrendous case a couple of years ago where a Frenchman took his girlfriend sailing across the Pacific, and he knew how to do everything on the boat. She knew how to do nothing except look pretty, and he fell overboard. And she saw him fall overboard. She didn't know how to turn the boat around, and she didn't know how to call for help with their radio. So there you are. She sailed off in an out of control boat, and he drowned. And she didn't even know how to use a radio to call for help. Not that he'd have probably been helped. So everybody needs to know how to use it, and you need to be able to get your weather and stuff in various circumstances, ideally by different methods. Duncan, do you want to go on that one?
Yeah. As far as written instructions, I think it's important that everybody on the boat is aware of Mayday and Pan and when you use them, and what's the call sign of the boat, and what you need to transmit on VHF or even on high frequency if you have an emergency and you need to put out a Mayday. You need to know the position of the boat. You need to know the color of the boat, how big it is. Radio call sign is always helpful. And those should be written down and laminated and posted in the nav station somewhere, so that if somebody needs to put out a Mayday, they have all the details of the boat that can be transmitted every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes or until you hopefully get a response. And the training for that is really important on whatever kind of radio you have. If you have a problem with your primary VHF, there's also an adapter that you can use to change the antenna on your handheld VHF, and you can actually plug it into the main cable going up the mast. So you at least have some VHF capabilities with a very good aerial that's hopefully with good wire and goes all the way to the masthead. I think that's about it for me. Back to you, Joan.
Okay, I'm going to go back one slide. Apologize for trying to get it to go back. I don't know why this won't go back. It always happens when you don't want it to. So I'm gonna do this.
Other thing I'll say while Joan's looking for the slide about communications is I mentioned that high frequency radio is excellent while you're crossing oceans. On every ocean we ever crossed, if there wasn't an official radio net going on, like the SSCA runs one off the Atlantic coast of the United States, we formed our own one, and we were talking to other boats that were cruising a lot, not with us necessarily, but within 500 miles of us, and a floating community going across the ocean. And we were able to talk to them every day, check in with each other, cheer each other up, commiserate about the conditions. And then in the eventuality of a emergency or near emergency, like our rigging failure, we had people nearby who were willing to help us. In the case of our rigging failure, it was because we were talking to people on our HF radio net that we had invented, leaving the Galapagos, that some American friends were able to bring us extra fuel. So we didn't have to get the Coast Guard involved in giving us extra fuel. We got other boats to come and help us. And so talking to people while you're crossing oceans, having a schedule where you talk to people is probably the most significant thing you can do to keep yourself safe and happy. And that's why I'm such a huge fan of high frequency radio, because you're not going to be doing that in Iridium Go. You can't talk to people who you don't know what their number is.
And thank you for that. That is making your own net, making your own buddy boats, and know what a buddy boat is really important. Now, slide 3 that I erroneously slipped through was best practices, resources, and planning and provisioning, water and food, fuel management, energy management, your water tanks, and managing crew. And you've gone across many, many miles, many different situations, many different places. Talked a bit about some of those areas for some of these topics.
Sure. So although we'd been sailing for many years, I'll say since I was 20, and leave you with the maths, we hadn't crossed oceans until we did the first time in 2014. So thinking about provisioning, I mean, you can read about it, but the bottom line is nobody ever complained they had too much food on the boat. You get to know what keeps well. You're obviously limited in most cases by your refrigeration or your freezer, which is also an issue for energy management. But you need to think about what you're going to have. Some people don't even like cooking at sea. That's a bigger problem. That's not a problem we have. But some people cook all their food before they start a passage. I think that's a little extreme. But you need to figure out how much food you need for everybody with extra, where you're going to put it, how you're going to keep it fresh. For instance, fruit and vegetables, they keep pretty well not in the refrigerator if you put them in fishing nets and hang them up. But you have to learn to keep certain things away from each other, like bananas are a disaster. They make everything go too ripe too quickly. You don't want them anywhere near anything else. So you get to know after a while, but you need to plan on your food and fruit and stuff. If you take fruit on board in the third world, you need to often wash it and check there's no cockroaches coming with it. You don't ever let any cardboard on your boat in the third world, or maybe not even the third world, maybe not even in the south of the United States. You do not bring cardboard onto your boat because there will be cockroach eggs in it, and that's the last thing you need to accompany you on your ocean passage. So you need to plan it all out. Initially, when you're first doing it, you need to write it all out, and then you go for the worst shopping experience of your life, where you end up with free shopping carts and thousands of onions and tomatoes and things, and find a place to put it all. And it's a big chore when you start. Water, huge issue. There is no such thing as too much water on a boat. Many modern boats are relying or have a water maker. That's a terrific thing. We had a water maker. If you're going to rely on a water maker, you need to have some understanding of how it works. You need to have your spare parts for it on board. You need to be able to consider fixing it yourself. Or bottom line, if you have a water maker, treat every day that it works as if it might be the last. So make your water and fill your tanks every day. Don't wait till you've emptied your tanks before you find out your water maker doesn't work anymore. If you treat it as a wonderful gift that's wonderful when it works, you're ready for the day it stops working, and you have full tanks, and you probably hopefully have some jerry jugs as well. You ought to have some clear understanding of how much water you use each day. My husband and I, without any saving of water, really. I'm not talking we have endless showers. We use 30 liters, so that's about 4 liters per gallon. You know, that's a few gallons every day. So we can carry enough water to not need a water maker. But we do have one, but you need to know how much water you're going to use, and then you're fine. But you need to think about it. And as well as all the fresh food you've taken, we carried a substantial supply of canned goods, canned meat, canned vegetables, canned fruit, so that, you know, if something happened and the mast fell down or there was a hole in the boat, we had enough food for, we thought, actually 2 or 3 months. When we arrived in the Galapagos and they searched our boat and asked why we were coming in, we said we wanted to buy food. They said, you have a lot of food here. And they were right. We had more food in our emergency supplies than they had in most of the stores on the Galapagos. So it takes planning, and you get really good at it after a while, and you get your favorite things that you like to take with you. But you can't buy everything everywhere. So there's some great stuff you can buy in the continental United States. You can buy canned chicken, canned beef, stuff like that, which you can make, you know, good meals out of. We became experts at making chili from corned beef. The same with fuel. You need, I mean, I think there is no such thing as too much fuel. When you've had a rigging failure, you really become very fond of having a lot of fuel on board. You need to know what your burn rate, as my American friend called it, is, how much diesel you burn an hour going at a modest revs, and then calculate whether you're going to get to the other end. Ours is 3 liters an hour, so a bit less than a gallon an hour at 2,000 revs, and we proved it for 6 or 7 days across the Pacific, and it worked out exactly right. So you need to know how much fuel you use if you are having to motor a long way, and, you know, the fact current and things might be against you will change that calculation. Same thing with gas, and the same thing with propane. You need to have an idea about how long your tank lasts you. It's no good running out in the middle of nowhere and then looking for someone to fill it. Duncan, do you want to go with energy management?
Duncan, you're muted.
Sorry, I just go back to diesel management for a second. The burn rate that you mentioned really is important. How much fuel does your diesel use in an hour to push the boat at a miserly 4 knots, let's say. But yeah, burn rate is really important, as well as having a lot of diesel and making sure that your tanks are clean. There's no sense in having dirty tanks and putting in clean fuel. So if your tanks have never been cleaned since you've owned the boat, trust me that there's schmutz, there's junk in there that will clog up your filters, especially in a seaway when you really want the engine to run, because it's nasty weather and the boat's throwing itself around. It stirs up everything in the tank. It ends up in the fuel filters, and when they get clogged, the engine won't run, and it's a horrible thing to try to change fuel filters at sea in a big sea. Energy management. Yes.
Come back on that fuel thing for one extra point. If you are, it's all right if you're sailing, well, I don't know about all the Caribbean, but if you're sailing in the Pacific, you will be buying fuel not with a hose into your tank, but you will be buying it in jugs. And you will be buying some of the dirtiest fuel you've ever seen in your life. You can physically see the dirt in the fuel. So you must have jugs to buy your fuel, and you must have a Baja filter to filter it with before you put it in your tank. We actually quite like buying our fuel in jugs, because then we can filter it every time. Obviously, sticking the hose straight in the tank is easier, but trust me, you don't want to be lazy about fuel. So check every bit of fuel you put in. And even in what you might call the first world, New Zealand and Australia, they have a terrible problem with water in their fuel from the pump in some of the big yacht harbors, because they buy their fuel from Indonesia and it's full of water. So filter everything you put in and you will not go wrong. But diesel bug is a nightmare. And if it catches you out, you are in trouble.
Thank you for that, Anne. Duncan, you had a comment on water, like filters or whatnot, the water maker systems, parts for them.
Yeah, I think Anne covered that pretty well. Just if you're going to depend on a water maker, then you need to know how to service it and when to service it. And if it breaks down, are you going to be able to fix it, or do you not have any water from that machine to get you to your next port? So I think spare parts for the water maker and a good service manual that tells you how often to service it, what needs to be changed, what needs to be serviced, and spare parts. They're usually available as a kit from the water maker manufacturers because they know the weaknesses of their machine, and they will sell you a cruising kit of spares. As far as energy management, I can attest to one of the failures that's very common to cruising boats are alternators that no longer charge the batteries. And yes, you can have a wind generator or solar panels, but the diesel engine with an alternator on it, or preferably two alternators on it, is quite a good resource. But again, you need spare parts. If you can have a spare pair of brushes for the alternator, maybe a diode pack for the alternator, a spare voltage regulator for the alternator, or both alternators. You'll get to some foreign places where you can't find the spare parts, but you could find somebody that will repair your alternator if you have the spare parts. So make sure you have that, plus some spare belts, and don't try to save money on fan belts or belts for your alternator and water pumps. Buy the very best belts you can. They will bring good value in spades to your cruising. Water tanks, I think Anne can maybe speak to keeping the water tanks sweet and clean in foreign countries.
Well, yes. I mean, again, if you're in more remote parts of the world, if you are taking on water, which isn't always easy, you will be taking it on again through jugs. Once you get to the islands of the Pacific, you can very, very rarely take your boat alongside in many of the smaller places and get water. If you can get water at all, you will be carrying it in jugs. So we have 8 jugs of water on our boat, but I'm a bit of a cherry jug addict. You need to be very careful about what you take on. Before I ever put water that I've collected somewhere in the tank, I actually test it with my water maker tester kit to make sure it is actually fresh water. Nothing can really save you from dirty water with microbes in it. So, taste it, see what it's like before you fill your tank with it. It's good to have more than one tank, because if you wreck the water in your tank, you have a big problem if you only have one tank. As I say, we carry 8 extra jugs of water when we're crossing oceans. So, if we lost the tanks or lost the water pump, we still have water. You need to think about how you could get water out of your tanks if your water pump system failed. I mean, hopefully you would have a spare water pump system, or you'll have a foot pump. You need to think about all those things. It's no good having thousands of gallons of water in your tank that you can't get out. And you need to manage the supply, and you need to be careful where you get it. And in some places you will pay a lot of money for it, which makes your water maker more attractive by the moment. But they are one of the more unreliable things you can take on a boat. So plenty of water on board, careful what you put in, careful with the filler cap, that it's got a nice O-ring on it and isn't leaking, so that when you're taking blue water over the deck, it's not contaminating your water. And it's the most important thing you add, really, water. And when you jump into your life raft, you want to take some jerry jugs of water with you.
Duncan, on managing crews, you had some comments.
Yeah, if you're crossing oceans like Anne and Jonathan did, just the two of you as a couple, that's great. But when you start cruising and you decide you want to do a 600-mile trip or an 800-mile trip or 2,000-mile trip, you and your wife may want an additional crew or two. And I think it's really important that you vet crew very carefully. Hopefully they're friends of yours from the yacht club, or friends you've known in the marina for a few years or even only a few weeks. But these seem to be nice people, and they're smarter than you. Let's say they've had more miles than you. those type of people that own their own boat, if they can spare the time and help you get to Bermuda or get further down the intercoastal, and you trust these people, they seem to be decent people, take them with you. But if you have to go into the public domain to find crew, you have to be really careful, because as Anne mentioned earlier, it's just no fun if you have a clash of personalities, or you have an alcoholic on board, or somebody that hasn't used the toilet for a few days. These things can cause a real problem. And if you don't have the right crew, if there's anything that you doubt about the people that you've brought on board, don't do the trip. Find another way to do it, or don't go. It's too risky. It's a long ways. If you're at sea for a week or two and you have a personality clash, or you have a language barrier or a cultural barrier, it can really raise hell. And it's dangerous. But at the end of the day, it can be dangerous.
Thank you for that, Duncan. And I know we all have experience one way or another with those kind of issues. You know, this system is just really having problems. We've done number 4. So now let's go to 4A, communications, how to communicate your situation requirements. And Anne, you probably are one of the best examples of managing an onboard situation with your lightning strike off of Tercera. Was it Tercera?
Yeah,
Yeah.
North of Azores. So obviously a true Mayday distress situation, you have to have the ability to call for serious help, which hopefully will be by radio or by satellite system or whatever. But quite often life is a little messier than that, and you might want help or to advise your family of a problem, short of calling out the Coast Guard or asking a passing ship to rescue you. So in our particular case, 24 hours north of the Azores, we had a direct hit of a lightning strike on the mast. Now, just talking about a lightning strike for a moment. Fortunately, on this occasion, we had been aware of lightning for about 6 hours. It had been in the distance and it was getting closer, so we had plenty of time to think about it. My advice would be, if you are in a lightning situation, and you often are off the coast of the continental United States, you have some terrible lightning storms. And I think as a matter of good practice, and I have done it before, but not on every occasion, as a matter of good practice, if you're in lightning and it's in your area, it's a very good idea to protect certain items for communication. In our case, we had a satellite phone, or you might have an Iridium Go with your iPhones. You might have iPads as backup navigation systems, which I thoroughly recommend, handheld GPSs. Protect them from the lightning. And the way you can do that is you can put them in the oven of your stove. You can put them in a microwave. That worked for me really well. You could even put them in a biscuit tin, which is a Faraday cage. But you need to think before you're struck about protecting some items. Now, we were struck by lightning, and apart from the items that were in the microwave oven, which I had anticipated rather miraculously, almost every electrical and electronic system on the boat was either completely destroyed or seriously compromised. All the navigation systems, all the communication systems, the fridge, the solar panels, the wind generator, the alternator on the engine, the charging charger that worked with the generator, everything. Even the LED light bulbs, all the LED lights at the top of the mast, the bow thruster, not that you need a bow thruster in the middle of the ocean, the autopilot, all of that stuff was taken out. The depth gauge went intermittent, came on and off. The wind gauge didn't work, nothing worked. So we were able to communicate our distress because I had like a witch, anticipated being struck by lightning, and I had put the satellite phone in the microwave. So having been struck by lightning, and this isn't entirely about communications, but I'll just give you my quick go-to guide on what to do after being struck by lightning. The first thing you do, especially on an American boat, is you check every through hull fitting immediately, because it's quite well known that lightning can go to ground through your through hulls and it can blow them out of the boat. So you might have a 1 foot hole in your hull. So we're coming back to where we started. I feel that the American custom of bonding the through hulls makes that actually more likely, but I'm not a marine electrician, and what they call the ABA would probably disagree with me. But check every through hull on your boat to make sure you're not taking on water. After that, you're going to have to go through every system on a boat and see if it's working. If you had your engine on when you were struck by lightning, which I did, turn it off. Now that's a bit upsetting because you were wondering if it'll ever start again. But you need to check the wiring loom on your engine to see if it's melted, to see if the alternator is about to burst into flames. In my case, the relay between the alternator and the battery system melted. So that's why you want to turn your engine off and just see what's going on with your wiring system. Then, if it hasn't melted, turn your engine on again, and make sure it works, but then turn it off again. Your starter motor may have been destroyed. And then, having gone through all your systems, you're probably going to need to take steps to preserve your batteries. And if anything is still working, don't use it, because you're going to wipe out your battery system very, very quickly. In my case, actually, the solar panels had stopped charging, but if I'd spent a little more time on it straight away, I would have discovered that it only needed some replacement fuses, and I could recharge the batteries with the solar panels. So it was only the fuses that went on the solar panels. And then look at your communication situation and start talking to somebody. In our case, we telephone. We had been in a radio net with Glenn Tuttle from KPK. So I managed to get his number, and I called him on the satellite phone to say, Glenn, I'm not checking in, but I am still alive, but I've been struck by lightning. So he would have been very concerned if I had already checked in every day of a passage from United States to Bermuda to the Azores, and I was on the way to England. So if I hadn't checked in like I checked in every other day, he would have been wondering what happened. So I was able to call him and explain why we hadn't checked in. And then we arranged a private little schedule where I continued to give a little check-in over the satellite phone. I was actually able, by calling a friend, former SSCA president, Ed Kelly, I was able to get the details of Chris Parker to get an updated weather report as we were approaching England because there was a major storm coming. So I was able to get a basic weather forecast from him instead of talking to him on the radio as I had been doing previously. In our case, we turned around and went back to the Azores because we were only 24 hours out of the Azores, and we decided we could make some significant repairs to our systems if we went back. We could have carried on. We were, after all, a sailing boat, but our batteries would probably not have survived the experience. We had no lights, we had no charging of any kind, and actually, personally, and this is not meant to be a joke, we were suffering from shock. It's a very alarming thing to be in a lightning strike. So after we got back to the Azores and mended everything we could mend, we just actually sat in a heap for a week to get over the shock of what had happened to us. You shouldn't underestimate how exhausting something like that happening is. So, have a plan about how you're going to communicate in distress, have perhaps alternative aerials. Even your VHF could do pretty well if you have it well maintained and it's a good quality one. A handheld one might do quite well. You can get a pretty good range on it, but have a plan about how you're going to communicate, husband your resources, don't panic. But yeah, I'm getting a question. Lightning master fuse are good to have. I have an Austrian engineer of my acquaintance is very, and he was there in the Azores to help us put the boat back together. He's an electronic engineer, very successful. He's a great fan of those hedgehog lightning diffusers. I'm not entirely convinced. I spoke to our insurers after I got back. I said, is there any single thing we could fit to this boat that would have saved us, protected us, that you recommend? And he said, no. And I know other people who've had their entire electronic system destroyed on their boat who weren't even directly hit by lightning. It hit 300 yards away and took them out. So I think if it's got your name on it, it's a problem. But it can't hurt to fit one of those hedgehog things at the top of your mast. But I don't know if it will actually save you. It's a pretty alarming thing. And there seems to be more lightning strikes. The insurance premiums are going up dramatically in the Mediterranean because of the amount of damage that the insurers have suffered from lightning strikes in recent years. And it's a huge problem off the continental United States on the East Coast. It's a big problem off the coast of Australia on the East Coast. It's a big problem off the coast of Africa. The big continents have big problems with lightning. And you need to have a plan for lightning and just hope it never gets you. But if it does, don't be surprised when nothing works.
And can you address the question of not having a microwave? Can you put the GPS and the satellite phone in a cookie tin?
Yeah, you could. Yeah,
Something
any
similar?
steel box, any steel box. The oven is widely thought to be the thing. And you could literally have a cookie tin. Any kind of metal box should help. Now, you can never know whether the reason my little things that I put in my box worked because I put them in the box or just they worked. There were other things that weren't in the box that continued to work after that. For instance, the laptop that was in a cupboard and wouldn't fit in the box, that worked, but it wasn't on. But everything that was wired into the 12-volt system of the boat died. I think my lightning went to ground through my bow thruster because that was cooked all the way from top to bottom. But it's worth trying to save some stuff and having plenty of backup systems. So we had a Raymarine chart plotter on the boat. We had a laptop with charts on, a CMAP, Open CPN, and we had 2 iPads with Aqua maps on and a little GPS, Bad Elf GPS that worked with them. And that's how we navigated home. It is useful if you know how to use a sextant. We had a sextant as well, but I was glad not to have to use it. We had the iPads and, great to be in the modern world with working iPads, if nothing else. And we were still able to charge them. But you can, someone's asking a question. You can save them with a simple box. Yes, if you had a metal tin. A paint can would probably do it.
Yeah, and that's a Faraday cage.
Yeah, Faraday cage.
A wire frame.
Yeah.
Interesting. We had a question on insurance about what you had to have for added insurance riders or a lot of
our insurance is an increasing problem, I think, especially in the United States. We were insured for the year before and throughout the whole trip by Pantaenius UK. You had a Pantaenius in the United States. It's a different company and it doesn't seem to provide quite the same standard of service, but we were insured all the way around the world by Pantaenius. We have found them in our circumstance to be a terrific company. They, as a condition of their insurance, they said they could specify the amount of crew that were on any ocean crossing, but they were happy with 2 crew, us, and a self-steering gear, a hydrovane. They were happy for us to sail around the world with 2 people and a hydrovane. And it's not cheap, ocean going insurance is not cheap. It was when we were in the United Kingdom, before we left, it was £1,000 a year. When we were sailing down across the Bay of Biscay, it was £2,000 a year. And across the Atlantic, it was £2,000 a year. When we got to the Panama, it went to £4,000 a year to cross the Pacific. When we got back to Australia, it went back to 1,000, Australia and New Zealand. When we crossed the Indian Ocean, it went up to £5,000 a year. And after we got to South Africa, they decided the rest of the world was dangerous and it stayed at £3,000 a year, including in the United States and all of the Caribbean and back to the UK. But if you average all that out, they paid for the entire lightning claim. I think I left with a profit because the lightning claim was £35,000 and they paid it without any difficulty at all. No trouble, absolutely marvelous. Can't recommend them too highly. But, insurance is expensive. And we had both the rigging claim and the lightning claim. So, and we're still insured with them now. Some people choose not to insure their boats. with really a question of whether you can afford to lose it. You're usually insuring against total loss of boat. And if you're prepared to say goodbye to your boat, you don't have to have insurance. But there are a number of people who get into problems, go on reefs, lose their boats, and they're not insured, and then we get the old GoFundMe claim things going up, and I find that slightly trying, actually. I think.
Duncan, do you have any other comments? And I'll go to the next slide.
I think the lightning strike is it's almost as scary, or maybe even more scary in some ways, as falling overboard. So my hat's off to you again, Anne, that you and Jonathan were able to come through this, and we're close enough to easily sail back to civilization to get some help. So kudos to everybody on Sofia.
Best practices, next step, communications. Be prepared. Some thoughts, people don't realize that if, for example, you get a lightning strike and you lose your laptop, your address book, your contact list, your logins for access, you don't have a backup and you don't have things printed out, you may have trouble. And you may need to have electronics repaired or backed up. A float plan, you need a float plan. Float plan is just information about your boat and who to contact. And basically in the US, there are certain things that the Coast Guard always asks for if they call you. You know, first of all, do you have life jackets on everyone? But then they ask a bunch of questions about the boat. So it's better to have it listed down, posted so the crew knows where it is, and let the crew give it to their family members. So the family members, if they're worried, knows to contact the person that you put in charge of your cruising plans. Now, Duncan, on the first two items, if you have comments, I'd like you to do it. And then I'd like Anne to talk over abandoned ship bags.
Yeah, I think the copy of the address books and the logins, maybe that's as simple as scanning documents and putting passwords together in a list that you can store on Gmail or Hotmail in your sent items or in the documents, Google Documents or someplace. So as soon as you get internet access, when you get out of your emergency, it's fairly easy to have a backup plan in the cloud. I also like the idea of having somebody ashore, a designated person ashore that can be reliable to contact your bank or your doctor or your next of kin to tell them that you're okay, that you've been struck by lightning in the Azores, but you're in a hotel and resting quietly. So that would be the float plan, and the contacts would be that designated person ashore who knows you well and you trust in an emergency situation to help you communicate with friends and relatives and professionals. If you're going to be a week late getting back to work, then the boss needs to know that you've been struck by lightning in the Azores.
Yes, and it's a good idea to have written out on a piece of paper and possibly stuck on your nav station the phone number of your national, in your case, the US Coast Guard, or in British case, Falmouth Coast Guard, their actual phone number. Because if you fire your EPIRB off, if you aren't already swimming and stuff like that, because you want to be rescued, as soon as you fire the EPIRB off, it's actually a good idea to call them and say, this wasn't a mistake. I did this deliberately. I'm in the middle of the South Pacific and I need help. Because they generally try and confirm things with people before they start rescuing you. So it's a good idea to have their actual phone number written down, programmed into your satellite phone so you can phone them. And rather interestingly, when we had another adventure, which hasn't come up tonight, when we put our boat on a reef, I discovered that the number for the insurance company is not written on any of the insurance documents. The number to call when you're having an insurance drama, like you want to be rescued from a reef in Fiji, is not on your policy or on anything that you have to look it up online. So you want to write that one down as well. I had to borrow somebody else's, internet to find out what the insurance company's number was.
Good idea. Good suggestion. Abandoned ship bags. Anne?
Well, abandoned ship bags, In mine, I have food, as in I have the kind of food you have in a life raft. I have food in my life raft as well, but I got some extra stuff. It's glucose pills. I have food. I actually had cans of baked beans as well, because I thought I could eat them cold, and a can opener. I have, it's not in the bag, but I have water. In fact, I did have some water, sachet measured out water in there. For measuring out water in the longer term, I had a jug and a cup. I had a spoon and a knife to eat this food with. I had another knife to, kill turtles with or whatever. I have flares, hand flares, as well as all the flares that are in the life raft, and as well as all the flares that are in the flare bucket. I had some flares in there. I had a GPS, handheld old Garmin GPS that will give you a position. I had a handheld VHF. I had batteries for both of them. I have a first aid kit. I would take the main first aid kit if I had time, but I had a small first aid kit with all the normal things in a small first aid kit. Had seasickness pills. I never get seasick, but if you're in a life raft, trust me, you will get seasick. I had sun cream, sunglasses, sun hats, long sleeve t-shirts, everything to try and make binoculars, small binoculars, everything to try and make living in the life raft doable. I would have taken the ship's papers. I would have taken the passports, but you have to add them. I would have taken credit cards, but you have to add them. Some people actually put their passports and their credit cards in their abandoned ship bag every time they set off. We didn't do that, but I had a list of things to add posted above my nav station. When I thought the mast was falling down in the Pacific, I wrote a list of all the things that were going to go in the life raft. It was quite a long list, actually, of things you had to add. But it's good to have a list. If you're going to add anything, if it's not already in there, make a list, because, when the drama happens, you won't be able to think straight. So think about it over a gin and tonic, a long time earlier, and prepare your bag, some of your bag, and be ready to add these other items to the bag.
And thank you for that. Yeah, Duncan? You're muted, Duncan.
Sorry. Anne's absolutely right. The things that she wants in a bag are spot on, and you can't have too many bags. So the more bags you have prepared simply with water or canned juices, if you have time and you can also get those into the raft, all the better. But you can't have too many abandoned ship bags.
So questions and answers. We have several people. Let me go back here. I've got so many screens open that it's a little difficult. Questions and answers. We had some questions. One on insurances that you answered, Anne.
Well, apparently I didn't answer it. He came back and said that wasn't the question he was asking. So if you'd like to ask it again.
Okay. This is from about existing life insurance policies. His question was about insurance with respect to life insurance. He's wondering if current policy underwriter needs to be notified of cruising activities.
Oh, I would think so. We had a health accident insurance, like travel insurance policy for sailing around the world. There's a British company who gives that coverage. It's called Yachtsman's Gold. So they gave us medical coverage and rescue coverage and all that kind of coverage for all around the world, all year round. Again, it wasn't cheap. And when my husband, for instance, broke his shoulder in Massachusetts, they paid the bill. Some kind of emergency medical insurance is important, and whether your existing life insurance, we don't have any life insurance anymore, we kind of grew out of it, but I would think you do need to tell them, or they will, insurance companies do like voiding their coverage if you don't tell them everything. In English law, it's called the law of fidei. It is, you have the duty to tell them everything they might think is interesting. Otherwise, they can avoid the policy. So I would definitely tell any insurers that I was doing this.
I think all insurances need to know, because you need to find in advance if they're not going to cover you for something, not after the fact.
Yeah.
I see we still have over 30 people watching directly, and then we have about 100 watching over here.
A very good extra insurance that you can take out, especially if you're an American, is this DAN recovery insurance.
Yes.
Work very well for Americans. They would cover you from all over the world to the United States. That does rely on you having medical cover when you get home, but they will get you back from all kinds of places. And it's very cheap.
Dan Boaters is excellent. You do have to be careful. There's a lot of vendors out there trying to sell insurances, and they may not cover some things you think should be covered, but Dan has always been very good. We're members of Dan, and we appreciate their services. Duncan, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I do have one last tip. We see regularly every year, we see people arrive in the Azores with some luck with their angels intact, but they may have steering compromises. Some people lose their rudders, some people break the steering cables and so on. So an emergency tiller should be standard equipment on most ocean-going yachts. The question is, where is it? Where is the emergency tiller? How quickly can you get it out? And do you know what to do with it once you get it out and try to fit it to the head of the rudder through the deck? So there's a deck plate normally on most boats in the center of the boat, backed by the wheels or the wheel. And first of all, you need to be able to remove that deck plate. So make sure it's clean and Vaselined regularly, so it's not gummed up with beach sand and corrosion, so you can't get that open to put the emergency tiller in place. So make sure you know where it is, how to fit it, and how to work with it. Because if you need it, you would like to have it fitted and working within 30 seconds of losing your steering. And I dare say that many people are not able to do that in 30 seconds.
Yes, and on the subject of steering, on several oceans we've crossed, we've met other boats in anchorages at the other end, or they've come in and they have lost their rudder entirely, had their rudder broken off. Nowadays they have them nibbled off by orcas. The possibility of losing some or all of your rudder is a very serious problem crossing oceans these days, particularly with boats that have unprotected rudders. And it's something you need to have a think about what you would do when you lose your rudder. When we arrived from the Galapagos Islands with our rigging failure in the Marquesa Islands, in the period that we were there for 3 weeks, 3 boats came in with compromised rudders. And it is a very serious issue, and you need to have an idea about what you do if you're in the middle of an ocean and your rudder is knocked off or bitten off or damaged in some way. There are ways of steering a boat without a rudder, but it's something you need to think about and possibly even try.
Unfortunately, that happened to a boat in November of this year, going to Antigua from Norfolk. The story about that is actually written up in Caribbean Compass this month, and it's an interesting read, to say the least. But they shared their 6-inch rudder stock almost at the waterline, and they show pictures of it, but they made it to Antigua. Anyway, Duncan, thank you so much. Anne, thank you so much. And for the people attending, this recording is going to be posted on the SSCA YouTube channel. We will make the slides available on SSCA, and I will post the terms and resources that we had from last week, the boat safety check webinar with Peter Birch. I will put that up on as a link as well on YouTube, and I will email everyone the links to all of this. And Anne, thank you so much. Say hello to Jonathan, get better. And Duncan, I hope we see you on the water before too much longer.
Yes, thank you, Joan.
And very fair winds, my friends. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.